Have you ever wondered how the United States was able to supply itself with enough ammunition to defeat the British Empire and get its independence? You ever wondered that question? It's just me who wonders that at high noon. It's a very, very big thing that always comes to my mind, but only me and nobody else. Well, for me who has always wondered this, well, the answer is right behind me. This is Fort Roberdeau, not far from Altoona, Pennsylvania. And I've always wanted to get the chance to come visit here. I see it on the maps of all the time when people talk about fortifications in Pennsylvania, and it's kind of smack dab middle of the state. So I'm finally getting my chance to figure out what was this fort all about. So how the heck did this fort behind me end up here in the Sinking Valley? Let's wind the clocks back to the 1770s. The American Revolution is outbreak, and the United States has a problem. If they want to win their independence, they got to fight the British, and that's all well and good until your supply of musket balls start drying up. You know, you can't shoot your gun and hit the enemy without a musket ball. So Daniel Roberdeau, who was a congressman in the 1770s. In fact, he signed the Articles of Confederation, and his house was used as a shelter for John and Sam Adams when the United States Capitol had to flee Philadelphia and seek refuge in York, PA. So Daniel Roberdeau knew about these land holdings of the Penn family out here in the Sinking Valley, and he also knew that the valley had ore deposits that could be used to create lead. So Daniel Roberdeau proposed that the United States put a fort out here in the Sinking Valley to protect lead mine operations. This fort was opened in 1778. It actually was guarded by two groups of people. There were rangers here and there was militia here. And believe it or not, the commanders of each were actually brothers of each other. So this post was actually commanded by a set of brothers. So this is going to give you a bit of an idea why this region is called Sinking Valley. We're actually standing inside of a sinkhole going right here into the side of the hill. Now, this part of Pennsylvania, the bedrock is made out of limestone, and limestone comes right up to the surface here where Fort Roberdeau is now standing. So natural acids eat away at the limestone, creating the cave systems in central PA. But of course, if too much limestone's bitten in, well, the whole ground's going to drop down, and that's what we have occurring right here. So this region is prone to the ground sinking in like this current sinkhole. Now, sometimes, not today, the stream actually gets filled with water. The water will actually go through the holes in the side of the rock here, the limestone rock, and actually it'll travel about 5 miles in underwater channels. I believe one of those channels actually empties into what is known as Tituna Cave. As I said, this is my first time visit, so I thought it'd be cool if we had our guide Rick featured in this video.
This building here would have been the officers' quarters where Major Cluggage and his brother, Captain Thomas, would live. So come on in here. I like to fool tourists and tell them to put the light switch on. You had china plates to eat off of. You drank from glassware. And the drink of choice would have been either wine or rum. Now the soldiers didn't get this. They had to drink corned whiskey because the water wasn't fit to drink. So they were encouraged strongly not to do that. But we were lucky here at the fort. We had a lot of people in the area who had farms, and we never had a problem with food. We always had enough food. Our biggest problem with shortages was probably just the boots and the blankets. But we did have a lot of food. We bought things from area farmers. We do have a copy of a ledger from Major Cluggage, and he made a list of what everybody, what transactions he's had, and he bought 400 pounds of beef and 8 1/4 barrels of wheat flour, 135 pounds of bacon, that lasted me about a week, and he bought 19.5 gallons of corn whiskey, 6 bushels of corn for different provisions, and then Jacob Roller had to be somebody who did bringing things to the fort. Some people said one of his relatives had a fort nearby called Fort Roller, but it was just basically a house. And U. Simpson did shoeing of some of the pack horses that were needed. But this was very valuable, so we made a copy of it. And this is one of the two barracks. And as you can see, there's sleeping for 12, but only one guy has a blanket or padding. And the other 11 bunks, if you were going to sleep in here, you would have to have straw. And you would cover up with the straw, you'd lay on the straw. And it worked out pretty good here at Fort Roberdeau. But when you think of Valley Forge, they had so much disease there that if somebody died of smallpox, they would take the body out, but would they change the straw? No. Then the next poor guy would go in there, lay on the straw, cover up with the straw, and then he'd get smallpox. So we were lucky here at Fort Roberdeau. We have the records of a soldier who applied for a pension, and he mentions, his name's Luke Tipton, by the way. There's a town right near us called Tipton, and Luke Tipton had to put on his paper for getting a pension what he did during the war. And they all must have been told to do the same thing, because there's like 3 or 4 of them that I read where they say we chased Indians and sometimes they chased us. So, and the reason Luke Tipton became a soldier is because he and his brother had to come to the fort for protection because the Indians were having an uprising. And they were bored sitting around because there was nothing for them to do. So they figured, hey, if we join the militia, we'll get $60 a month. That's what they did. So, good story, good story. And these were modeled after the ones at Valley Forge. You know, George Washington insisted that every barracks needed to have a fireplace, of course, a window with glass, and of course a door. So they did follow that. This right here is the base for a swivel gun. Are you all aware of a swivel gun? I wasn't sure if we had one at Fort Roberdeau, but there was some archaeological work done at Fort Shirley outside of Mount Union, and they discovered a swivel gun. And I went up to look at it when it was on display at Juniata College, and it was the same one that we have. So come on in here and check this out. This is the storehouse. We know that the man who was the commissar was Peter Riley, and this is where he kept everything except gunpowder. You didn't want to keep that in here. Now this is that swivel gun, and you probably know they go back to the 1300s in Asia. And the one that I saw that Juniata excavated is the same, except the wood had rotted by then. But this is where you kept your muskets, and of course there's the barrels over there, which would have been the corn whiskey, and I see they didn't take the rest of the cobwebs off from the haunted trail. One way to preserve your food was to dry it. So here they are drying a ham. We have some spices here. String beans. I always wonder why my grandmother called them string beans instead of green beans, because you strung them like that. And then of course you could always go fishing, and look at what they used to hold the net down, little lead balls. Sometimes they would salt their food to, to keep it from spoiling. This is salted beef from Harris's Ferry, which is Harrisburg today. And here's some salted pork. So food wasn't a problem here. The problem was we didn't have blankets and we didn't have boots.
So efforts to reconstruct Fort Roberdeau started around the 1930s. They were stalled by the Second World War. This reconstruction was initially finished in 1976. But something to keep in mind is, unlike some fortifications, which have a very good footprint to locate because they dug posts deep into the ground, since the bedrock is literally what we're standing on here, the limestone bedrock, they did not build the fort with posts going into the ground. They did not build with a palisade. What they did instead was, they laid the logs horizontally and put them in these cribbings. And the foundation you see here is a modern foundation. It's not the original. So there was very little evidence of where the original fort was in terms of a foundation or footprint. So they knew the rough location. They built on the rough location. Further research has since revealed that the original fort was probably somewhat bigger. It was 150 feet by 150 feet. The bastions in the corners of the fort had a very unique design. I think they had like 4 or 5 different sides on them. The photos appearing right now will explain a lot more than what I'm doing. And they also found in reports that they claim to put in 48 buildings for this fort. I'm very curious as how they would have arrayed 48 buildings, but that's what's in the reports from Daniel Roberdeau and other individuals that were instrumental in establishing the original fort. The museum has now since worked to make this more of an authentic reconstruction. Another thing that they found that they're going to start doing here in the future, that the original buildings inside the fort did not have a back wall, so they actually would have been built right into the stockade. So that's something they're going to be working on in the coming years.
But this is one of the bastions here with the cannon port. That way you could wheel the cannon up to the cannon port and you could fire at your enemy.
And how many would have been in a bastion roughly, cannon port wise?
There would have been 1 in each wall.
And I must have been a very awful battle here, because a lot of gravestones have been set up. A battle must have occurred many years before the fort was built. So what you're seeing here is this is a display from their haunted tour that they did over the weekend. And from what Rick told me, it was very successful for the organization. They had about 1,500 people here for at least one night. So very good on Fort Roberdeau. Now, I should also mention, no evidence has been found of any individuals actually dying here at the fort.
This building right here is our cabin for the miners' hut.
So the miners that would have come here, are these soldiers doing their job, or are these people strictly here to mine the lead?
They were recruited in the Philadelphia area, and their job was to mine lead or smelt lead. And it was always hard to get help, just like today. But one of the problems here is that it was so dangerous. And if somebody offered me money to go back to Philadelphia, I'd go too, and that's what they did. And I think more than misplaced water wheels was the issue with having the mining operation not be successful. But after Ben Franklin went to France, he was able to get the French to join the war effort for us, and we didn't need the lead made here anymore. But the fort still stayed open until the end for people to come and seek shelter. Yeah. There's a pair of wooden shoes that the lead miner would have wore. And of course the lead miner was like everybody else in this time period. They had something called the poor man's silver. And the poor man's silver was tin, because everybody could afford tin. And they would have eaten out of this thing called a trencher. And you don't see any utensils anywhere, so they used their hands. But I'm sure they washed their hands really good before they started to eat. And a couple other bowls we have here. And I think I smell something baking. Let's see. We have some bread in there. Now this doesn't work, but the one in our log house does work. But the what you would do is build your fire right in the oven, and whenever the temperature got high enough so you could bake, you pulled the coals out and put them in your fireplace. And that's and then you close the door, and boom, you had some bread. So we're probably going to have to make some butter here in a little bit so we can have some butter on that bread. And you would keep your tools here along the wall because you didn't want them to get lost or stolen. And the sleeping area would have been up here in these lofts.
Oh, yeah.
And this ladder right here had 2 purposes. One, it was how you could get in and out of the loft. But 2, you took that to work with you, and that's how you got in and out of the big holes. So these guys had it all together. Lead miner, of course, didn't have much. That's why you don't see luxuries here. So. And then, of course, after the lead miners probably went back to Philadelphia, I'm sure that any cabins that weren't being used would be occupied by people who came to the fort for protection.
Kind of hard to see with the stalks of the corn, but somewhere over in his cornfield is most likely where the lead mines were. Juniata College sent out a team to do some excavation out here, and they found evidence showing at least 3 locations where a pit could have been dug to extract lead.
Blacksmith shed, and that is a working forge. Whenever you're going to do blacksmithing, you need an extremely hot fire. So you would use something like coke to keep your fire hot. And those billows do work. So when you pull that handle down, the billows put extra oxygen into the fire, and it gets red hot. Red hot. We do have, when we have a special occasion, we usually do get somebody who becomes the blacksmith, and usually they bring their own forge instead of using ours. But the event we had at Roberdeau weekend, they actually used that. So I was going to say, wind picks up. Okay, and then here is our smelter. You can see there's no chimney on it, and they used it one time. Now, if you come here and see us smoke, we're not smelting. We are just doing it for effect. But you can see how they would just pile the wood up, and as the wood reached 600 degrees, then the lead would run out the bottom of the smelter, and there would be a worker there to scoop it up.
Now, they did not produce actual bullets here on site. What they were producing were these ingots of lead, which were made in wooden molds, believe it or not. I mean, I guess that's the resource they have here, wood, so might as well use it. So they would have made ingots. Those then would be hauled over the mountains, got to the Juniata River, where it'd be floated down the Juniata River and offloaded on the Susquehanna River in present-day Middletown, Pennsylvania. After the American Revolution was over, the Penn family went back to what they normally did, sell off their land to the highest bidder. So while they were trying to, one of the ways they tried to convince settlers to come out here in the 1780s, they ran an ad in a magazine, believe it or not, with a beautiful illustration of Fort Roberdeau. And it was promising people, hey, if you come out and settle in the sinking valley, you're going to be protected by a fort from native raids. One problem with that, like I said, this fort was only here for 2 years, and most likely by the late 1780s, nothing was standing here. So, you know, we're talking about the same family who also created the walking purchase with the Native Americans. So, you know, very trustworthy individuals. Now, since the site of Fort Roberdeau is still in such a remote location, a local group has established an observatory right here at the fort. And what's really cool is inside the building currently is where they have their telescope, but when they come out at night to look at the sky, they can move the building away from the telescope, so you have an unobstructed view of the night sky above. That is so cool. Look at that. That's so cool. So, there's my answer. Why Fort Roberdeau's out here. What's it all about, and how the Americans try to supply themselves with enough ammunition to combat the British Empire on their own. I am now satisfied. I don't know if anybody else has had their questions satisfied, but I've had my very peculiar questions satisfied. If you like this video, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to Readout Productions. And if you want to help me out in an additional way, you can go to my Ko-fi page and buy me a cup of cappuccino. I need it in the morning sometimes, and I greatly appreciate it. So I'd like to thank Rick for allowing me to record and include him part of this video of Retracing History. He's a fantastic guide here at Fort Roberdeau, and I hope you enjoyed learning about the story of the lead mine fort in Sinking Valley. See you in the next video, folks.